Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I'm with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 3 and 4 of A to Z Mysteries, The Haunted Hotel, written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 3. The three kids stood frozen as the elevator door slid shut again. For a minute, no one moved. Then Ruth Rose reached over and punched the up button for the elevator. "What are you doing?" Josh squeaked. "Following the ghost," she said. "Are you crazy?" Josh said. "What if ghosts don't like kids?" "Gee, Josh," Dink said. "Thought you didn't believe in ghosts." "Unless I see one with my own eyes," Josh said, and I just did. "Let's get out of here." The elevator door opened. "Too late, Josh," Dink said. He and Ruth Rose pulled Josh into the elevator with them. Dink pushed the button marked 2. "We'll check each floor," he said. When the door opened on the second floor, the hallway was empty. "2 more floors," Ruth Rose said, pushing the number 3 button. But they didn't see the ghost on the 3rd or 4th floor either. "There are no more floors," Dink said, looking at the panel of buttons. "Good. Let's go home," Josh said. "What's this one for?" Ruth Rose asked, pointing to a black button without a number. "Maybe you push it for emergencies," Dink said. She shook her head. "Nope. This red one says emergency." Dink shrugged. "There's only one way to find out," he said. He pushed the black button. The elevator creaked, then slowly started moving up. "I'm having a nightmare," Josh mumbled. "I'm not really chasing a ghost around a hotel. Any minute I'm going to wake up in bed." "Don't worry, Josh," Ruth Rose said with a grin. "I'll protect you." The elevator stopped with a gentle thud. When the doors opened, the ghost was waiting for them. "It followed us!" Josh screamed, jumping behind Ruth Rose. "No, you followed me," the ghost said. "What do you want?" Behind the white figure, a door opened. A stooped, gray-haired man stepped into the hall. The ghost pointed a thin finger at the kids. "They followed me up here, Ebenezer." The man chuckled and shuffled towards the open elevator. "Well, perhaps we should just keep them." "No!" Josh yelled from behind Ruth Rose. "Please let us go. If you kill me, I'll be grounded for sure." Dink stared at the figure in white. Where had he seen that face before? Suddenly he remembered. She was the woman in the picture on Mr. Linkletter's desk. Dink stepped out of the elevator. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Spivets," he said. "I'm Dink Duncan, and these are my friends Josh and Ruth Rose." "How do you do?" the man said, peering at Dink. His eyes were the color of blueberries. "You must be the 3 children our nephew told us about." Josh peeked at Mrs. Spivets from behind Ruth Rose. "You mean she's not the ghost?" he asked. "Of course I'm not the ghost," Mrs. Spivets said. Ebenezer, shall we invite these 3 in for cookies?" "Of course, my love." The old man smiled at the kids. "Come along, kiddos." The kids followed Mr. and Mrs. Spivets through a small hallway and into an old-fashioned parlor. Sunlight poured into the room. Through tall windows, the kids could see treetops across Main Street. Dink looked around the room. The walls were covered with paintings, and he'd never seen so many books. Mrs. Spivets came in carrying a tray. "Please sit," she told the kids. She handed each of them a glass of milk. Her husband bustled in with a cookie jar shaped like a rooster. He pulled off the rooster's head. "Cookie?" he said. Each of the kids took 1 cookie. "Now then," Mr. Spivets said as he sat next to his wife, "what are you kids up to?" "We read about the ghost in the newspaper," Ruth Rose said, "and we came to see it," Dink said. "But we didn't," Josh added. "Then Mr. Linkletter told us how the ghost is ruining the hotel's business," Ruth Rose continued. "So we've decided to investigate." Mrs. Spivets stared at the kids. "Investigate?" she said. "Like detectives?" "Right," Dink said. "Did you see the ghost?" he asked Mrs. Spivets. She looked at her husband. "No, but we've heard it, haven't we, dear?" He nodded. 2 nights in a row. Dreadful noises coming from the walls, and a voice calling out my name. "Ebenezer," it said. "Go away! Go away!" Josh gulped. "It knew your name?" "The voice spoke to me, too," Mrs. Spivett said. "It said, 'Flo, leave this place.'" She began to cry into a lace hanky. Mr. Spivets patted his wife's hand. "We've just made a difficult decision," he told the kids. "We're going to sell the hotel. Some real estate company in New York wants to buy it." "Sell the Shangri-La?" Dink blurted. "But you can't," Ruth Rose said. "We're going to leave the Shangri-La to our nephew," Mrs. Spivett said. "But now it looks as if the hotel will go to Each, Rail, and Rook," Mr. Spivett said. "Who are they?" Ruth Rose asked. "They're the 3 partners in the real estate company," Mr. Spivett said. "They've been after us to sell for months." He crossed to a small desk and pulled out a letter. "They want to tear down the Shangri-La and build a high-rise in its place," he said. Mr. Spivets placed the letter in a tea tray. "Mrs. Spivets and I don't want to sell, but we don't know what else to do. Somehow we feel as if we failed our guests." He looked down at his wife. "I telephoned the real estate people this morning. They will be here tomorrow with papers for us to sign." Mrs. Spivets looked up. Her eyes were red. "Isn't there anything else we can do?" she asked. Ebenezer Spivets took his wife's hand in his. "I would do anything for you, dear, but I'm too old to fight ghosts." "Well, we're not," Dink said, springing to his feet. "We'll find the ghost and get rid of it, too." He looked at Josh and Ruth Rose. "Right, guys?" "Right," Ruth Rose said. Mr. Spivets beamed. "You're hired," he said. Josh groaned. "Can I have another cookie?" he asked. Chapter 4. "How are we going to get rid of a ghost?" Josh asked in the elevator. "Even if I did believe in it." "I don't know yet," Dink answered. "But we can't let those real estate guys tear down the Shangri-La." The elevator door slid open. Mr. Linkletter was standing behind his desk, just staring into space. "Let's go to my house," Dink whispered. "We can make a plan while we eat." "Yes," Josh said. "Those cookies weren't big enough to fill up a flea." Dink laughed. "Not everyone has a stomach like the Grand Canyon, Josh." They headed up Main Street, then followed Silver Circle around the school to Dink's house. Dink got out the peanut butter and bread. Josh found a bag of pretzels. Ruth Rose poured milk for everyone. "Make my sandwich extra fat," Josh ordered. "I'm fainting from hunger." Dink pushed the peanut butter and bread toward Josh. "I'm not your servant, your Royal Highness." Josh grinned and began building his sandwich. "Okay," Dink said, sitting at the table. "How do you get rid of a ghost?" "First, you have to prove that there is one," Josh said, taking a big bite of his sandwich. "You still don't believe there's a ghost at the hotel?" Ruth Rose asked. Josh swallowed and shook his head. "Nope." He lined up 4 pretzels on the table. "We talked to Livy, but she hadn't seen the ghost," Josh said. He picked up a pretzel and ate it. "Then we asked Mr. Linkletter if he'd seen the ghost, but he said he hadn't." Josh ate another pretzel. He picked up the last 2 pretzels. "Mr. and Mrs. Spivets didn't see the ghost either. They just heard noises." Josh popped the pretzels into his mouth. "Guys," he said as he chewed, "nobody we talked to saw the ghost, so maybe there is no ghost." Dink and Ruth Rose stared at Josh. "He's right," Ruth Rose said after a minute. "Everyone we talked to said someone else had seen the ghost." "So what should we do?" Dink asked. "We have to see the ghost for ourselves," Ruth Rose said. Dink blinked. "But how do we do that?" he asked. Josh licked peanut butter from his fingers. "Well, we could start by finding someone who really did see the ghost." "But everyone who saw it checked out of the hotel," Ruth Rose said. Dink swallowed the last of his sandwich. "We have to talk to those people," he said. "Maybe Mr. Linkletter will help us." "Good idea," Ruth Rose said. "Let's go back to the hotel." "No dessert?" Josh asked. "Wipe off your milk mustache and come on," Dink said. The kids hurried back to the hotel. Mr. Linkletter looked up as the kids came in. "I heard you had a chat with my aunt and uncle," he said. "They hired us to get rid of the ghost," Dink informed him. The corners of Mr. Linkletter's mouth wiggled. It was almost a smile. "And do you have a plan?" "Sort of," Ruth Rose said. "But we need the names and phone numbers of the guests who saw the ghost." Mr. Linkletter shook his head. "Sorry. Our guests, even the ones who leave, pay for privacy." "Well, are there any guests left at all?" she asked. Mr. Linkletter pointed to a man and woman reading in a corner of the lobby. "Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers haven't checked out, but I don't know if they saw the ghost." "Let's go ask them," Dink said. He headed across the lobby. The man was wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a white sweater. The woman had black hair and wore a dark blue sweater and faded jeans. "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffers," Dink said. "My name is Dink. These are my friends Josh and Ruth Rose. We're investigating the ghost. Did you see it?" "Why do you want to know?" the man asked. "Because the hotel owners have hired us to get rid of it," Ruth Rose said. "If there really is a ghost," Josh muttered. "There is," Mrs. Jeffers said. "It scared me half to death." "So you saw it?" Dink asked. "We both did," Mr. Jeffers said, sitting down his book. "Last night we played cards down here until about midnight. When we went up to our room, this thing appeared out of nowhere." Mrs. Jeffers shuddered. "The hallway seemed to grow cold," she said. "What did it look like?" Ruth Rose asked. Mr. Jeffers closed his eyes. The ghost kind of shimmered as she walked. She had a wild-looking white hair and long, glowing robe. "And black holes instead of eyes," Mrs. Jeffers added. "You said she," Ruth Rose said. "Was it a girl ghost?" Mr. Jeffers looked at Ruth Rose. Well, I guess so. At least the robe looked like a woman's." "And you said the ghost walked?" Dink said. "Did it have feet?" "Feet?" Mr. Jeffers said. "I'm not sure. We hurried right into our room." Just then Mr. Linkletter came over to the sofa. "Excuse me, Dink," he said. "My uncle is on the phone." "Mr. Spivets wants to talk to me?" Dink said. Mr. Linkletter nodded. Dink followed him to the phone. "Hello," Dink said. He listened for a few minutes, then hung up and walked back to Josh and Ruth Rose. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Don't tell me they saw the ghost," Josh said. "Nope, but now we might," Dink said. "Mr. Spivets wants us to sleep in the hotel tonight." Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 5, 6, and 7. Goodbye.